and welcome to Creature Texturing for Games in Substance Painter and Unity. I'm Justin Marshall, and over the next few hours, we'll go through the process of painting textures for our bird creature that we've modeled over the last couple of courses. We'll do this using the concept, sculpt, and geometry created in the previous courses. We'll start by importing our modeled geometry into Substance Painter and prepare our project. We'll learn to quickly bake all of the maps that Substance Painter will use to help create our textures. We'll then go step by step as we start creating textures for our model to control the color, roughness, emission, and other material attributes. We'll create wood, gold, skin, claws, and any other look that we need. Once we have our creature look completed, we'll export our textures and set up materials to work within a real-time context in Unity. Let's begin by looking at our model and then setting up the project in Substance Painter. So here is the start file. This is basically the end of the previous course where we created the game geometry using some retopology techniques here in Maya. And so this is going to be O1 begin if you want to start with this. You can also start with the end result that you created from that particular course. In this file, we have the high-res geometry, which is the decimated meshes. And then we also have the game res geometry that we created. And so we want to export two different things. And I've already done this, but you want to export out your high geometry as OBJ files, and I've done it as separate models so that we can mix and match which ones we use for the baking. And then we also need an FBX of our game geometry. So I'll go ahead and select our model. Let's choose File, Export Selection, and we'll just export it into the Scenes folder of the project that'll be in your project files. And it's going to be an FBX, and so we'll call this Bird Creature Export. And we'll go ahead and export that. Okay. So once we have that geometry exported, we can do that as one file because everything is separated already by material. You can see we have the body as one material, and we did that all in the last course, but just go ahead and double check. You can see that everything that is a different color is going to have its own texture. You can also export the OBJs. I've already done that. And so if you look in the data folder of the Maya project, you'll find all of those individual OBJs. And those are the high-res sculpts decimated so that we can bring those in and use them to bake maps. So now let's jump over into Substance Painter and start setting up our project. So here we are in Painter. We've got a blank scene. So let's go ahead and say File, New. And I'm going to leave this template on PBR Metallic Roughness. And let's go to Select, next to File. And within our project files, we're going to go into the Maya project, go into the Scenes folder where we exported that FBX, and we're going to select that. I'm going to change my document resolution to 2K. We don't need to use UV tiles, and we have everything already UV mapped. And so let's say OK. So we've got our geometry in here. If anything looks amiss, you can go back into Maya and fix that. Everything looks OK so far. You can see all of the materials listed over here on the right. These correspond to those different colors that we saw. So the head, the body, so forth are all separated out here. You can see the UV layouts on the 2D side over on this side. And if you click on each one of these, you'll see the different UV spaces. So what we need to do first is bake all of the mesh maps. And so Substance Painter uses some really cool masking techniques and material techniques. And a lot of those utilize maps that are baked here in Substance Painter, maps that will indicate the curvature of the mesh or the underlying mesh, normal maps, things like that. And so we want to bake those maps first. So we're going to come over here into the texture set settings. You can see down here, these are the maps that are going to be associated with this particular material: color, height, roughness, metallic, and normal. We don't have any maps yet. And so we're going to bake mesh maps. So we'll click on this button. All right. So the maps that we're going to be baking are located over here on the left side. You can see them with a check mark. If there are any maps that you don't want to include, you can uncheck those. Let's go ahead and change the output size, and I'm going to make these 2K. And now if we jump over to selection, you'll see right now all of the models are selected. Okay. And so what we can do is do these all at once, or we can do them one at a time. I want to do them one at a time because I kind of want to separate out which high-res meshes are going into the contribution for which low-res mesh. And so for instance, let's start with the body. So I'll go ahead and uncheck everything else, come back to common, and here is where we want to drop in the high-res meshes. So we're thinking about just the body. So we're going to drop in the high-res meshes that contribute to the detail for the body. So click this, and we're going to come into, instead of scenes, the data folder. And so here is the list of all the OBJ files that we've exported. Okay. And so thinking about the body, we've got the body high, we've got the claws high because the claws are actually part of the body geometry. The cowl's separate, the head is separate, the wood pieces are separate, the jumpsuit is not separate, so we've included it as well. And then also the main sash. So we've got these 4 different objects that are going to be contributing to this one mesh. So let's go ahead and say open. So now all of those are listed here, and those are all going to be the source meshes for the target, which is our body geometry. Okay. And so let's go ahead and say bake selected textures, and let's watch as those textures get created. Now we can see that sort of normal detail on there. So we can see the bumpiness of the skin, the smoothness of the jumpsuit, where the trim is on the jumpsuit, the separation between this jumpsuit and the skin down below. All of that's one piece of geometry, but having those different pieces in there enable us to separate that stuff out in one map. Okay, we can look at the map here. We go to body, we can see the different maps. You can also come in here and look at the different mesh maps. If we scroll down, here's the normal map, and you can kind of recognize these are the legs. You know, if you remember going through the UVs, you'll also notice those. And so we didn't use the pieces that were over the top just because we didn't want any occlusion contribution from them, things like that. We've got the sash here, again, part of the same geometry. So we can come back up here and we'll just look at the material. Okay, so now we need to just do the same things with the other pieces. And so any of these pieces that are separate. Now the padding, we don't need to have anything like that. The wood we'll need to do. Now the wood contains a lot of different pieces. And so let's go back into our settings here, bake mesh maps. And here we want to choose the wood. And then we're going to remove these objects and we're going to add some different ones. So we're going to add this back piece, the belt wood high piece. We're going to add the cowl, the hip wood. Okay, so those 4 basically. So we'll go ahead and add those in, and now we'll bake selected textures. And now we're concentrating here on these wood pieces. Okay, so now we get the detail from the carving on the wood and the detail on these wood pieces. Let's do the medallion. So we'll go to make mesh maps, selection. Let's choose the gold, which includes the medallion. And then we'll come back in here, remove these, and let's add our medallion piece right here. Okay, that's really the only piece as far as the gold pieces goes that has a high resolution mesh that we'll use. Some of the other materials we'll actually create from scratch. So go ahead and open that. And let's bake selected textures. So you see it missed a little bit there, and you can see some of the detail doesn't quite look right. And so on this one, I'm going to come back in and I'm going to change these distances just a little bit. So let's say 0.05 on here, and then we'll rebake. So if you ever have any issues, you can always just rebake the textures. There we go. And that medallion looks a lot better. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the head. So go to selection, do the head. We'll go back to common. Let's go ahead and add our head. Let's go ahead and say bake selected. Okay, so you can see that detail now around the head. Okay, the horns actually are separate from the head, so we'll go in and do those as well. Choose the horns, and this time we will remove the head, leave the claws, and we'll bake. All right, so now we have that detail on the big tooth there and the horns on the head. All right, so that is the preparation for our model by creating our mesh map. So we can see now the normal maps that we have. There are a lot of maps that we can use as far as curvature and ambient occlusion that we'll use in some of the smart materials and smart masking that we'll use later. So next, let's go ahead and set up the eye. The eye consists of a few different layers, and I always like to get that done kind of early on. And so let's go ahead and work on that in the next lesson. Now let's set up some textures and materials for the eye. So I'm going to start with the eye, and the eye consists of 3 pieces. 2 of them are going to be really, really easy to set up, And then we'll have to do some texturing on the third part of the eye. So the outer part of the eye is going to be this reflective part. And really all we need to have is the reflectivity and then also some opacity so that we can see what's behind that. So we can see the pupil and also the iris and that main part of the eye. So let's go ahead and concentrate on the outer part first. So we're going to go to eye outer and let's go into the texture set settings. You can see that it's using this main shader, and I want to actually create a new shader instance. So I'm going to go new shader instance. Now it's using this copy. So now we'll go into our shader settings. And with this main shader copy selected, I'm going to choose, instead of PBR metal rough, I'm going to go ahead and choose this PBR metal rough with alpha blending. So we'll change that material. And then we'll jump back to our texture set settings. And now we need to add a channel that can let us drive the amount of opacity. And so let's go in and add a channel, and I'm just going to choose an opacity channel. Now we can add a fill layer on our eye outer, and I'll go ahead and get rid of this initial layer. Now the fill layer, I'm going to choose a base color of something close to black. All right. Height, we don't really care about, so we can turn that off. Normal, we can turn that off. And let's go ahead in the roughness, and I'm going to look at the highlight, and I want to define that a little bit more. So I want to make it a little bit shinier. So I'll reduce the roughness amount. You can see how that makes the reflection really, really clear. So something like that. You can also turn the metallic up and down and see how that affects things, but I'm going to leave that at a pretty low amount. The opacity, right now it's at 1. So this slider is going from all the way opaque to all the way clear. And so we want to just dial this down a little bit so that we can now start to see the eye through this, but still see the reflection. So we can always go back and change this, but the key thing now is that we can see the other parts of the eye. So let's go over to the eye pupil. We'll add a fill layer. I'm going to go ahead and delete this initial layer. And here on the pupil, I want to change the base color to black. And then I don't want any sort of reflectivity on this. And so I'm going to change the roughness all the way up. So it's completely rough. We want all the reflectivity to happen on the outside of the eye. All right. So now we can concentrate on the main part of the eye that's going to have the texture. That's going to be this eye inner. So let's first create a color for the sclera. So I'm going to choose a fill layer, and I'm just going to make this base color white and maybe a little bit of like yellowish in it. Okay. And I'm just going to rename this and call this sclera. All right. And then on top of that, we're going to make a layer that's going to be the color for the iris. And let's start with just kind of a base color. So let's go ahead and create a new fill layer. And on the sclera layer, I'm going to go ahead and increase the roughness. And then on this fill layer, I'm going to choose for the base color, I'm going to do something like a reddish orange, maybe with a little bit more red in it. And this can be changed very, very quickly and easily. So we're just dropping in a base color. Now, we also on this want the roughness to be all the way up. So we want that shininess to come not from inside there, but from the outer layer. And then I also want to mask out the area that's not the iris. So the area that's going to need that sclera color underneath. So let's choose a white or black mask, either one. Let's choose a white mask. And then I want to create a black shape wherever we want this to not show up, which is down here. So we'll go to our polygon fill. I'm going to choose to fill by UV chunk, go to black, and then we'll click on this part. And now you can see that color's only showing up on here. Let's go ahead and turn the eye outer off for a little bit as we start to do this. And so now what I want to do is create the sort of lines coming along this iris, coming down into the middle. And so there are several ways we can do this. I'm going to go ahead and create a new fill layer. And let's come down to procedurals. Let me pull this up a little bit. And I want to choose this anisotropic noise right here. And so I'm going to drop this into the base color. So that's what it looks like currently. So I need to rotate it. See, it's going horizontally and I want it to go vertically. So let's come and rotate this 90 degrees. So I'll just put 90 right here. And this is the area that we're looking at right in here. And so let's go ahead and mask out the other area. So I'll create a black mask. And now I want to go in with my polygon fill this with white. So now we're seeing that up at the top. We can also go in here and let's do a soft light. So we get something like that. And now we can come into that noise and start to change some of the parameters. And so you can see here, if we change the X amount, we're getting these little strands. You can see where it kind of shortens them a little bit. And so I actually do want to add a little bit of that to it. So maybe something like that. Okay. You can also change the Y amount to increase or decrease the number of those. So I'm going to maybe increase those a bit. So we get maybe something more like that. And again, we can go back here and maybe let's add a little bit more red into this. So I'll come back in here and maybe something more like that. All right. Now I want to add some shading here. And so I'm going to go in and create a new paint layer this time. And I want to create a black edge kind of around here and around here. And so I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit of a larger brush size. I'm going to do this in the 2D view because it's straight across. Let's go ahead and get black for our color. All right. And now I want to paint a line that is straight across. And so I'm going to click, hold down Shift, drag across, and then let go and click again. And I've created a completely straight line. We'll do the same thing down here. So click, Shift, all the way across, let go, and click. And now we've added that line all the way across. Now I want to blur this out. So I'm going to go ahead and add a filter. Let's choose the blur filter and we'll increase that. And you can see that widens that line out, kind of blurs that edge a little bit. So we can widen that out a bit. We can also come in and dial down this a little bit more. So maybe something like that. But I do want to have that black in there and in there. Now we can also come in on the lines here and we can add a blur to those as well. And so you can see that's without blur. So we can maybe add just a little bit of a blur there. All right, let's turn our eye outer back on. So even that is looking pretty good, but we can come back in here into the color and start to brighten that up so we can see it through that line there. Now I want to add a couple more layers here just to make it really pop. And so I want to kind of emphasize the shadow that should be right here. And this iris should be a little bit darker at the top and then a little bit lighter where the light hits at the bottom. And so let's add another layer. So go ahead and add another paint layer and it's going to be all the way at the top. All right. And I'm going to turn the eye outer off. And on this paint layer, let's go ahead and I'm going to change this to white. Get a bigger brush size. And maybe not that big. I'm just going to paint in right across the bottom there. So something like that. Now I'm going to choose some different blend modes here. So let's go to an overlay. And then let's also blur this out because I don't want that hard edge down there. So we'll go ahead and add a blur, increase that blur amount, and it should start to blend that edge out a little bit. Let's do the same thing in reverse. So we'll create a darkness at the top. So we'll go ahead and add another paint layer. This time we'll choose black. All right. And this time I'm going to paint in across the top here. Something like that. Let's go ahead and we can dial that down. We can also add a blur. And let's go ahead and change the intensity. So it kind of blurs it out a little bit. Okay. And then I also want a shadow that goes across the whole thing. So let me just add one more layer. And this one, I'm going to create a dark line right across the whole thing like that. We can come in and change the blending to darken that up a little bit. Let's turn the eye outer back on. And it really just brings it a little bit more alive there. Now, if we wanted to, we could also add some detail back here with some red. Maybe add a little bit of red back there would be good. But we'll go ahead and leave this as is, and then we can sort of tweak it later if we need to. I can dial that darkness down a little bit. All right, so let's get it to a point where it looks something like this. And you could add some extra noise in there, but I think that looks pretty good for now. And so the next thing that we want to do is create a base for the skin. So we'll we'll start with areas like the hands and the legs, and then be able to apply that base to our head. So we'll go ahead and do that next.